Hello again. Let's take another look at some more attributes of God. Let's continue to try to understand Him better through this series. If you're following this series, there's such value in understanding what God is truly like, and that's what we find in the Bible. As always, I kind of want to start with what we see in the world, and I want to kind of look at two things today because in my mind they really go together. I tend to talk about them together. If you've been following this series, you know that we talked about the justice of God recently, and that God is perfect in His justice. It's good that He is a just God and does punish things that are wrong. We know that in our world, justice is not what always happens. Often that's a bad thing when there isn't justice for wrongs that take place. But then there are other times when something wrong happens, but people maybe get let go with a warning. Like, we all appreciate it if you've been pulled over and the police officer lets you go with a warning. I mean, it's treating you like you kind of like it when the justice isn't brought to bear because you could get a ticket, right? Or the times when someone chooses to forgive and forget when you've wronged somebody, you've done something wrong. In justice, they would have some consequence for you, but maybe they don't do that. They just forget it and move on. We sometimes call this being merciful when you don't get what you deserve, so to speak, when you should have a bad consequence, so to speak, but that doesn't happen. We call that being merciful. Other times it goes even further, and people who have messed up or done something wrong actually get something good in spite of their badness, if you understand what I'm saying. We sometimes call this showing grace to someone, and it's often prompted by love. You may have seen this if you're a parent in the way you've treated your kids sometimes. In fact, there's a story I heard some years ago from a gentleman named Stuart Briscoe, pastor, author. He was speaking at a conference, Bible conference I was at, and he talked about how these three things go together: justice, mercy, and grace. And he kind of spun a story something like this. There was a boy who was wanting to be hitting a baseball in the backyard. Well, his dad told him he can't do that. He's not supposed to hit a baseball in the backyard because if he hits it wrong, it's going to go through, maybe go through a neighbor's window and break a window. And as the story went, the boy didn't heed his father's admonition. He hit a baseball. It ended up breaking the neighbor's window. So justice, in this case, the father would punish the boy and for doing what he wasn't supposed to. Maybe get a spanking. He'd have to pay for the window or fix the window, and things like that. That would be justice. It'd be right for those consequences to take place. Mercy is the dad saying to the son, "Son, I know what you did is wrong. I'm not going to punish you, but let's go work together and let's go fix the window." Something like that would be mercy. He gets let off a little bit. Grace is the father saying, "Son, I know you broke that window and you weren't supposed to, but right now I'd really like to take you to get an ice cream cone because I love you." You kind of see the difference. Justice, you get what you deserve. Mercy, you're not getting what you deserve. You should have to do some consequences, kind of thing. And grace is when you're getting something you don't deserve at all. And that's kind of the way I describe it. Mercy is when you don't get what you deserve. And grace is when you do get something you don't deserve. Those phrases sound a little confusing, but you think about it, it makes sense. Mercy is when we don't get what we deserve. Grace is when we get something we don't deserve. We as humans do practice these things. We practice justice, mercy, grace. We practice these sometimes rightly, sometimes imperfectly or wrongly. But there are concepts that we understand, and we've probably been at both ends of these things multiple times, I imagine. So again, having already talked about the justice of God, let's now look once again at God in the Bible and look at His mercy and His grace. Again, I want to share some verses with you. The Bible speaks of God as merciful lots and lots and lots of times. Same thing with His grace, same thing with His justice. I'm going to share just a few passages. In Lamentations 3:22 and 23, it says, "The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness." In Luke 6:36, Jesus says, "Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. Again, speaking of God the Father. In Titus 3:5, Paul writes that God, He saved us, not because of works done by us in righteousness, but it says, but according to His own mercy. And we could go on and on. God is a merciful God. Speaking of God's grace, John 1:16. You remember, grace is when you get something you don't deserve. Some good thing comes along and you didn't deserve it, but you get it. That's grace. John 1:16 says, and from His fullness we have all received grace upon grace. James 4:6, James writes, but He, God, but He gives more grace. And therefore it says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And you can hardly talk about the grace of God biblically without going to Ephesians chapter 2, 8, and 9. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God. That's grace. But it's the gift of God, not a result of works or something you did, so that no one can boast. Great verses on grace. And in fact, there's at least one, maybe more, that actually put the two together. In Hebrews 4:16, we read, let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace in time of need. So we as human beings, we practice these things inconsistently, certainly imperfectly, sometimes well, I'm sure, but not all the time. Justice, mercy, and grace. We try to practice these things, but God is these things. God is a God of justice. God is merciful. God is a God of grace. God always knows what is appropriate when it comes, yes, to dispensing justice and judgment. And God always knows when it is best and right to extend mercy to those who deserve judgment. And God is a God of grace who sometimes chooses to give good things to those who do not deserve those good things. And by the way, that's all of us. None of us deserve good things. That may shock you if you don't know the biblical understanding of human beings. But the Bible's understanding is, of course, the correct one, and we may deal with that more later. Well, a little bit here. See, when you understand your brokenness, all the ways that you fall short, see, God has set up a holy standard. Here's where you must attain to be holy, to be right before God. And we can't meet that standard. None of us do. We can call this being sinful, and that's a reality. If you're honest with yourself, you know you've done things that are wrong. That is sin. So, the mercy and especially the grace of God become all the more spectacular when you understand that you don't deserve these good things. We deserve justice. We deserve judgment because we've done things that are wrong against a God who is the ultimate judge of what's right and wrong. It's Him to whom we have to answer. And we mess up. We don't deserve His mercy, and we certainly don't deserve His grace. So when you understand that He is merciful and a God of grace, in spite of the fact that we are so broken and fallen and messed up people, again, it makes His mercy and grace all the more spectacular. Like the other attributes of God, these realities are a great source of comfort, certainly, and should result in great gratitude and thankfulness to God. I hope that's the case, and that God will bless you as you seek to know Him better.